So if you're regular here, if you've been coming along to the Saturday mornings, you'll know it's a bit unusual to see two people sat at the front for this second half. Usually we'd have one of the order members here giving a talk about something, maybe some questions and answers. I think recently you had a question and answer session, didn't you, where it was just questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's not so unusual. But to have two of us sat up front is a bit strange. So this is an experiment, and we'll see how it goes. I don't know if we're experimenting with each other or on you, but anyway, it's a bit of an experiment. And I think the inspiration has come out of a weekend retreat that we did together with Ataketu last weekend, and some of you here were on that weekend. And Ataketu came up with this image on one of the sessions where he was talking about how our lives are like a woven piece of fabric. So an individual person, it's like we've woven something together throughout the course of our life, the things we've done. And he was saying that through Buddhist practice, through meditation, he feels that the weave has got a bit more open. So it's not quite so tightly woven together. He's managed to open up the weave. And he was saying that when we open up the weave, it's more porous, so more influence can come in. It's less closed, so it's more open. But also you can weave other things into the spaces. So we were talking about inspiration and how inspiration arises and how you can weave inspiration into your life. And I think for myself, practicing Buddhism for many years now, there's more inspiration available. So more things, I notice more things and respond to more things and am able to weave them in to this tapestry of life. But also there are more other people. There are more people who are also doing that, where the weave can start to happen together. So I think I experienced that particularly with you. Tarapalita is a good friend. We've been doing this together for a few years, and it's like our inspirations weave together. So the idea is we're going to talk about our inspiration, some of the things that are coming into the weave at the moment for us, and we'll see if they weave together or not. And in any case, it'll be interesting, because if they don't, it shows the diversity of Buddhist practice. If they do, then it shows the unity of Buddhist practice. And maybe they're not contradictory from a certain point of view. So we came up with the idea on Wednesday night, I think, and said, well, I'm interested in this, I'm interested in this. Let's just present them both and see what happens. So Tarapalita's inspiration at the moment is Vajrapani, which I'm going to let him talk about. I might ask him some questions as we go along. I might ask if you have any questions as we go along. But he's going to speak about Vajrapani. I'm going to speak about one of the Buddha's followers called Bahia, which is a change to the advertised WhatsApp message. But I had two streams of inspiration and decided to choose the other one. Okay. Anything to add?
No. That was amazing.
Okay.
Wow.
So we'll start with Vajrapani, and just ask Tarapalita to tell us why is Vajrapani, who or what is Vajrapani, and why is that an inspiration for you at the moment?
Well, I thought it was a very good introduction, and especially the bit about inspiration, because I thought in a way your whole Buddhist life is about kindling inspiration, isn't it? You know, you have a kind of thread or something that's really important to you, and sometimes you think, I've made it, I'm a Buddhist now, I know what I know, and I found the thing in Buddhism, and then it kind of starts to fizzle or something else comes in. So yeah, it will work because it's inspiration, so how can it not work? Anyway, so Vajrapani, God, how do I start? Vajrapani is like he's a figure that appears in later Buddhism that I kind of came across when I first came across Buddhism about 20 years ago, and I don't know, it's a very strange experience recently. It's like this, you come across these different figures in the tradition, and some of them tend to they start to kind of exert an influence in your mind, and I should say it might be teachings, it might be different figures, but some they tend to kind of grow in your mind over time. And this particular figure is one that has just grown in my mind a lot recently as well, and maybe we can go into why, but in fact it seems to have been dominating my consciousness, which is rare for me. I'm not one of these people that had particularly profound kind of, but it's definitely in my consciousness all the time for some reason. So I'm not really sure what to say about Vajrapani, whether to kind of start with some kind of historical basis for it, or just describe the figure. You're nodding. Which one? Describe the figure. Okay, so Vajrapani is a bodhisattva. Yeah, we can go into what that is in a while. A being. Maybe you could call him an archetypal Buddha. Yeah. You could say a figure that has emerged from the depths of someone's consciousness or people's consciousness, maybe spontaneously during kind of deep meditation and retreats and a life, maybe handed on to other people, yeah, from somebody. So it's a strange kind of figure. So this figure, Vajrapani, is huge, blue, yeah, quite fat, very muscular, covered in flames. He's got 3 eyes, fangs, claws, snakes all over him, sometimes depicted with an erection, stamping on a figure and hurling what's called a diamond thunderbolt. Yeah. So he's quite a figure, eh? And that's what he looks like. And I think it's funny because I think when I first came across him, there was an element of exoticism, yeah, as this figure that I'd never seen a figure like this before, so there was an element of exoticism, but it doesn't seem like an exotic figure to me anymore. It seems like I don't know, something more personal. In a way, I think I was inspired by this figure because I wasn't particularly inspired by Buddhism when I first came across Buddhism. Buddhism seemed to me, at least from what I'd seen, to be a bit kind of, I don't know, boring and grey and a bit lifeless. I thought, what are these people doing all day? They just sort of sit around and be nice to each other and drink tea, and I just thought, it's like, I don't want to be this guy. And it just seemed a bit lifeless. And okay, this is a bit bad, but unfortunately, I think in some corners of the Buddhist world, I can't really talk about other countries, but in the UK, it is a bit like, it has turned into, in some places, what our founder, Sangharakshita, was terrified would happen, which is basically a kind of Anglican church service. So it's just like, if you don't know what that is, it's a kind of slightly boring form of Christianity where everyone's very polite and kind of nice to each other, and I'm sure it's very supportive for people, blah, 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 yeah. But it's not what I was interested in. So coming across this figure was like, it was something wild about this figure, and it communicates something. And like all these figures, all these different bodhisattvas, yeah, there's Avalokiteshvara, you could say a representation of compassion. There's a picture up there. It's got 1,000 arms, yeah. And you've got this particular figure, this huge wrathful, covered in flames, he's kind of violent, sexual, this whole thing, this figure. And the question is, in a way, when you approach these figures, what would you feel like? If you look like that, what does that communicate? What does that feel like? Yeah. So if you can imagine yourself being huge, blue, covered in flames, teeth, fangs, snakes, fire, what does that kind of, and moving, and you've got this destructive power and a third eye, it communicates something. So, yeah.
Can I interrupt?
You can
ask
interrupt.
a question? Because you said you felt this figure of Vajrapani was dominating your consciousness at the moment, and that's rare for you.
Yeah.
So what does it feel like for you to be dominated by this blue figure with fangs and a third eye? Like, what's that actually doing to you? Can you put it into words?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, the figure's to do with energy, isn't it? To do with kind of free-flowing energy. It's like, well, I mean, it's funny because we're used to the wisdom side of Buddhism. You know, if anything, Buddhism is kind of best known for wisdom, isn't it? In terms of depth of insight. There's the compassion side and there's the energy side. But energy is a bit less well known in Buddhism. It's like less of a kind of thing. People come for compassion, they come for mindfulness, they come for wisdom, but they don't often come because they want unlimited energy or some kind of everything moving, everything on board. And for me, it feels a bit like all those I mean, there's a lot of things that we keep outside the Buddhist center. You know, you turn up and you're nice to people and and then you leave and you're like in Berghain, like doing some madness on someone, or you know, and it's just like you have to bring that into your practice, otherwise you've got a split and you will have a lifeless form of Buddhism. So I feel like, I don't know, I just feel something to do with energy. But also I realise there's definitely a side of me, I think I've developed a receptivity over the years, practicing the Dharma, you know, like being receptive to people, hopefully kinder, although some people might disagree, but generally kinder. More kind of receptive. And I think I need a destructive quality. You know, like I had a destructive quality before I got into Buddhism, but it was very basic. It was a very kind of crude form of destructive, which was destroying maybe other people, other things. It was like to get my own way. And I kind of just binned that because I just thought it was completely it wasn't out of control, but it just seemed like an impossible task to try and do anything with that. So you go a bit one-sided, and I feel like I was a bit one-sided, like. So I feel like I'm a little bit more able to communicate more decisively with this figure. It's very strange, these things, with this kind of energy. And the reason I think it's happened is because it's had to happen, because I think I'm just sick of... I'm one of these people, I have been one of these people where you'll get some incoming from somewhere, someone will say something, and then someone else will say something, and I'll say nothing. And I'll just kind of absorb it all, and then think that's fine, and then it's like, actually it's not fine. And now I've got a big job at the end of the week, so I've had 3 conversations that I've got to come back to people with, and try and it's a big thing now. It's grown in me, I then have to charge it with them and explain, and I would like to be much more like Thunderbolt, like, you know, like Vajrapani, to be able to, in the moment, just boom, you know, whether it's, and then you're free, your energy's freed up. So I think that's why I'm inspired by it.
So there's 2 things in that. One is that it might be that we have, let's say, cruder energy, that somehow it would be good to work with rather than hide away.
For sure.
Or try to cut away. It's like, actually, how do we work with that? And for you, this figure is a way of, okay, I've got the symbol of destruction. I can see that my life can be destructive. How do I refine that destructiveness into something more helpful? And the other thing is more like seeing qualities that we don't have but would like to have, and seeing them in visual form or symbolic form can bring that out in us.
And that's why I find it interesting, because in a way Vajrapani is a figure that arrived in Mahayana Buddhism, but also he seems to be more connected with the Tantra, which is a more magical, ritual, perhaps, form of Buddhism. And it does feel like that. It's like a strange kind of mind magic where you bring together mantras, or you focus on these figures, and something happens. It has it exerts an effect. But I just wanted to say as well, it's not just destruction, it's actually to do with healing as well. Because it's been a strange, you know, like I realised, like the medicine Buddha, I don't know how, you know, these things all fit together, it's strange. The medicine Buddha's blue as well, so it's to do with energy. And also the snake, you know, there's Vajrapani's covered in snakes. It's a bit like, I don't know, what isn't it, Asclepius, the Greek healing god. Is he a god? You know more about
half god, half human, I think.
Yeah, you told me the myth. That was
So.
That was a crazy myth. Anyway, Asclepius, this Greek half god of healing, has a snake, and I won't bore you with my dreams or anything, but there was all these snakes, and Vajrapani's covered in snakes and he's blue. So I think it's a weird thing. It's to do with energy. It's like the healing thing. I think in a way, for your energy to move, you need to be able to, I don't know, destroy certain things. And when he's talking about destruction with Vajrapani, he's talking because I was thinking there's a lot. Buddhism's quite violent in a way. There's a layer of violence and destruction to it.
Say more about that.
The Buddha said we're at war with Mara, or you're at war with, and Mara, you could say, is a personification of ignorance. So you are destroying parts of yourself, consciously, hopefully. You know, there is a. It's all poetry. You can't take that literally. You're not literally going to get in there and destroy yourself, but. Yeah.
Okay. But there was more coming than that. It's not just about destruction. It's about healing.
Yeah. So, and I just feel like, I think in order to have one, because at the end of the day, I feel like I get sick fairly often when something's wrong with my energy. Like my energy's off. I think a lot of people do in this culture, actually. I think it's a really common thing. Like my energy's all over the place sometimes. That I can't sleep. There's a kind of weird thing going on. And a lot of it's to do with energy. There's all these, we live in such a kind of unnatural environment in many ways. And just so the way we are socially, that I think it makes us sick. And I've definitely been feeling that, and I don't want to be like that anymore. So I think it's a kind of twin thing, isn't it? Your energy needs to be moving. Somehow it needs to be moving, and it needs to be all there for you somehow. Yeah,
it's like the energy of our culture, let's say, is a high energy, but not necessarily under our control or conscious control, and that can prove problematic.
But it kind of relates to the whole thing, because I guess it's like there's this word virya in Buddhism which gets translated as energy, but it's not just energy, because you're saying, okay, our culture is high energy, but it's high energy in one, it's got a purpose behind it sometimes, whereas virya, like energy in Buddhism, is energy in pursuit of the good. It's like a specific kind of directionality to that energy, isn't it? It's not just going all over the place. There's a kind of purpose behind it, which is to do with becoming kinder and becoming freer, I guess.
Okay, I've got one other question, and then maybe see if there's any questions in the audience. So, what would you say to people who are maybe newer to Buddhism and Buddhist iconography? Because it could be that we come along, we see an image like this or an image like the Buddha, I hear what you're saying, and then I just go out there and I imagine I'm this blue figure with snakes all over them, and I'm going through the city, and then I get run over because I thought I was huge and I could step over the road. So
who's that? Who does that?
Well, I'm caricaturing. I'm sure nobody here will do that.
No one does. Anyway,
I'm caricaturing to make the point that maybe there's a difference between imagination, a positive use of the imagination, and a misuse, or a fantasy. So what advice do you have? How do people actually engage with this kind of iconography and drawing on these archetypal forces without just making a mess of it, or getting into difficulties or something? That's
a great question, though, isn't it? Because in a way, even if you've been practicing Buddhism for a long time, you still have to deal with that whole kind of question, isn't it? Because it's not that's it. What we're doing here is not just fantasy. It's not just some kind of nice figure to bring to mind because it's fun, or you're on some kind of trip with it. I don't know. We've got all our stock answers, don't we, in Buddhism? Like at least these days.
What are they?
Well, what are they? The stock answers would be literalism. Literalism is the problem, where we're in a bit of it's a more subtle area. It's not just a fantasy. It's not nonsense, like you're playing a game with yourself. But it's also not literally true. There's not this figure called Vajrapani that exists independent of all this, and then you somehow get in contact with that and get taken over. It's something I feel like you have to kind of feel your way into it, isn't it? It's a kind of an imaginative process where there's maybe hidden parts of us that we're just not aware of sometimes. That I don't know, it's something one's created with, isn't it? You have these figures and you let them sit in your imagination, and they exert an effect. you know.
I wonder if one useful counterbalance or one useful counterpart is, say, the 5 ethical precepts. Loving kindness, generosity, contentment, truthful speech and mindfulness. And if in our engagement with these figures those things are not being acted out, maybe then it's going off into something else, but there's a sort of useful anchor or something that grounds us is our ethics, and then there's the imagination that can help inspire those ethical activities. But if they're not, then maybe it's straying into fantasy, or it's like we have a balance.
So you would have to test it then.
Yeah.
So you could, in a way, you introduce something into your consciousness. I mean, whether it's a teaching or a figure, and then you see what the effect is over time, don't you?
Yeah. Or ask, like, okay, so Vajrapani, covered in flames, covered in snakes, looks angry, stamping on somebody. What's that got to do with loving kindness?
Yeah.
It must be an expression of that somehow. And maybe it's, the symbolism of stamping on greed and hatred and delusion and the things that make people suffer. So his destruction is directed at that. So in that case it is an expression of the precepts. Yeah. But maybe if we just have ethics and we don't have Vajrapani or other figures or something that elevates us imaginatively, maybe then it's just the Church of England. Not wanting to, but that archetype of boring, nice community where everybody's being nice to each other, but something's not engaged.
Something's not there. Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, I guess one of the points of that figure in a way is if you're going to practice Buddhism effectively over time, you need energy, and you need a lot of energy, don't you? And sustained energy, because it's hard work sometimes. Sometimes you just had enough. It's like, why? I really don't want to be kind to this person right now. I want to be the opposite. And sometimes it takes energy, and I don't know, I feel like with these figures somehow, because they're embodiments rather than ideas, they're like they're not concrete because they're made of your mind and they're made of light. They're not actual concrete figures, but I feel like ideas will only take you so far in a way. You need images as well. You really do. Wherever they come from, you need some kind of image to draw you forward. And also, I feel like with these figures, it's like I personally want to develop the kind of mind that won't run away from me when I need it, or the kind of heart that won't run away from me. And it does sometimes. You get into a sticky situation. I mean, look at the state of this planet. It kind of scares me because I think, oh my God, I don't know what I'd be like if X and Y was going on. So I think the point of these sort of practices and figures is also to develop the kind of consciousness that is actually there for you when you actually need it. Not as a game or as a luxury, but as an actual, I don't know, something you can rely on. As part of your consciousness.
Okay, let's just see if there are a couple of questions. Got a few more minutes before we move on. Yeah?
Yeah, so I'm curious, did some kind of an event happen, maybe a negative or a positive event, it doesn't matter, that made this figure come to life? Was there a specific trigger for it?
Was there a trigger for this figure? I think so. I don't know. I feel like in recent times something's been building that's been building for me for years somehow. It's almost since I got involved in Buddhism, like just or probably before that, just a sense of I don't know, like blocked energy, and it was just becoming more and more acute. And a friend said, it's interesting because like I'm in my mid-40s now. And he was saying there's certain things that when you're younger, parts of your character, you can hold them down in a way, that you can deal with them. You're physically strong enough to kind of suppress certain things and put yourself in a certain shape. And I just thought, I'm getting more and more ill. I'm getting sicker and sicker and more tired and headaches and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I thought something needs to change. And so I think the triggers, it's been a long trigger, but it was more like, now's the time. I've been avoiding that side of myself for a long time. I think because, you know, you develop a crude version of it, which is quite, I wouldn't say extreme, but quite strong, of what you think energy is. And then, so I think, it's a good question. I think, yeah, the trigger is, for me, was more to do with health. And the side effect of that has been communication, somehow.
And maybe a follow-up question, do you feel now that you're moving this energy more closer to people, or
Yeah.
distance?
Yeah, no, I would say closer. That's been the main thing, I think. I don't know, without getting too personal, I think one of the main things that popped up for me in recent months was just like almost a little voice, a childlike voice, just saying, please be here. Because, you know, it's easy, especially if you've got bad things going on or things that you are painful for you. We all do it, we dial out. You know, and I just thought, wow, I've been doing that a lot in my life, like on answering machine, you know, like people, maybe I'm quite good, I can be quite sociable sometimes and friendly and and people think, oh yeah, that was really great. And you know, those weird experiences when you walk away from a walk with someone, they're like, oh, thanks for the walk, it was so great. And you're like, thank you, yeah, it was great. And you walk off like, you're not really present. I just thought, I'm sick of this. I've had enough of this now. I've had enough of being an answering machine, you know, and just not having energy to just be there with somebody and actually be with them when I'm with them. So I think, yeah, thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
I think you had a question here. It's gone. Okay, Olivia.
When you're talking about this figure who's a sort of angry figure, I remember when I first came across Padmasagara and she was talking about she threw a stone, I think it was like an X-level. This is a Buddhist nun who writes wonderful books. And I mean, this figure is a male figure that you're talking about, but as a woman, often in society we have to suppress anger, even more so than men. I think traditionally, and it's one of the difficult things that is, I mean, you're saying to kind of harness that anger to, and I think there's an extra difficulty, especially from my generation. I notice my daughter is very good at harnessing her anger, but from my generation of women, it's a little bit harder, and there's very few examples of sort of angry Buddhist women out there. Padmasagara is a very good one, thank goodness she exists. And I was wondering how from, that figure being, I mean, it doesn't really matter if the deity is male or female in the end, maybe one should just forget that. But how to sort of tap into, yeah, when you're saying you're destructing a part of yourself, I think that was really good that you said that, because that was a kind of route to channel that anger, and how that maybe there's an extra step needed when you've really been told you shouldn't be angry really all your life.
I don't know. You got any thoughts?
Could you repeat the question?
So I think the question is there an extra step that's needed in order to harness the energy?
Yeah.
If you've been told all your life, don't express it. And you're saying that as a woman you feel that there's been an extra level of suppression and cultural expectation upon you. Yeah.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because in a way we've got this kind of authenticity culture, which actually been helpful for me to express anger, because I'm not very good at it sometimes. But it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you can kind of, Buddhism's fairly clear about expressing anger in the sense of it's incredibly close to hatred. You know, we like to kid ourselves that we're just angry, but it's always verging on hatred. And it is literally like playing with fire, isn't it? So it's like how you express, I mean, sometimes it's very necessary to express it, isn't it? I don't quite know. I mean, there's so many therapeutic schools and ways of exploring expressing anger. But I think sometimes one can easily think, oh, it's fine to just, you know, I'm just expressing my anger, and you've kind of trampled on a load of people and kind of destroyed everything around you, and then wonder why that happens. Like I've done that a number of times. But there has to be a way. There has to be a way of expressing it in a sense, and I think a lot of people do, don't they? Through art or therapy or communication or violent sports. You know, even things like death metal. I don't know if anyone's into death metal here. Anyone into death metal? Yeah. So you know these concerts. Yeah, you go to all the. I used to go to like sorry, a bit of a diversion, but I used to go to like these garage raves in London. Yeah. And everyone was so well dressed, yeah, and so like Versace, ironed, sunglasses, champagne. It was like looked so swish. It was so violent. There was so many shootings. People stabbing each other. It was like a madness, yeah. And it looked so like nice. And then you go to these death metal concerts. They're going absolutely mental, like throwing each other across the room, headbanging. But they're so nice. They're such nice people. They're all like by the bar afterwards, like oh yeah, gentle and nice and. So that's interesting. Like the nicest crowd. So they figured out a way. It's like real anger management. So maybe death metal is the answer. I don't know. No.
I wonder, just to add one thing, I wonder if part of the issue a lot of the time with any emotion, so not just anger, is whether we allow ourselves to acknowledge that we feel it. So I think that's often a problem, isn't it? That we can't quite acknowledge what we're feeling. Particularly, you come along to the Buddhist center, you learn that you should have loving kindness, generosity, blah, 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 and then you start to see every instance when you don't have those things. And it's easy to quickly short circuit to, having the emotion I shouldn't have, let's have that one instead. So we sort of manufacture it. Whereas I think it can be helpful to actually just really acknowledge what our emotional experience is without acting that out. So I would say that's a first step. It's definitely a necessary step. Like, what do I actually feel about things? And it might be that we feel angry, it might be that we feel incredibly sad, it might feel that we don't really, we're not that bothered, and we feel we should be bothered. But unless we take that step, there's no transformation. We're just jumping out of one thing into another, and it's sort of too heady and ideas based. But if we can actually feel, well, then we've got some material to work with positively. So I think feeling it without the usual reactions is a kind of key stage.
I have to say, I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated when I first came along, was just meeting people that I could tell people, I could feel anything, and you test the water with people, don't you? Like you have this feeling like, I felt like, I want to say what, doing something terrible, and they're like, oh yeah, that's fine. And you're like, oh really? Because normally you get a weird look from someone like there's something wrong with you, or you shouldn't. That's kind of off. So it's very nice to be able to be with people that you can kind of just be like.
Especially if we're used to being told how we should behave.
Yeah, you shouldn't feel angry, you shouldn't feel this, you shouldn't feel that.
Anyway, I think we need to...
Yeah, we need to move on to yours.
Move on to the second weave.
Do you want me to ask you a question?
Yeah, you have to. Now you have to... We're switching roles now.
Oh, wow. Oh, this is hard work. So what's your inspiration? Why Bahia?
Yeah, good question.
I'm good at this, I'm improving.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
So, well, maybe before I say why Bahia, I have to say who he is.
Yeah, who's actually good? Who is Bahia? Tell me.
Who is it?
Yeah.
So, Bahia is one of the Buddha's early followers. So we get this text in the Udana, which is a short collection of teachings of the Buddha. And in one of them, the main character, if you like, is Bahia. And he's already got a spiritual practice, and he's even got a bit of a following. So he's seen as a teacher, people look up to him. But then one day he just has this moment where he asks himself, like, am I enlightened? Because he thinks he is, and other people think he is. Am I enlightened? Have I seen how things really are? And then he has a dream where a Devatar appears to him. So this is like a Buddhist god, one of the gods. and says, no, you're not. And you're not even on the way to becoming one. So whether we take that literally or whether that's just the process that was going on for him, he suddenly had this doubt, like, maybe I'm not. And this Devatar told him, you could go and see the Buddha, he's enlightened. So he sets off on this journey to find the Buddha, and takes several days walking to get there, and he finds the Buddha. But the Buddha's on his arms round, so he's going round the different houses with his bowl, collecting food. And as soon as Bahia sees the Buddha, he's just so impressed by his kind of graceful appearance, the way he's walking, the mindfulness, looking down in front of him, going from door to door. And he goes up to the Buddha and kind of throws himself at his feet and asks for a teaching. And the Buddha says, not now, Bahia. It's not the right time. And he pleads with him. He says, no, please, we don't know what's going to happen. You're already enlightened. I'm trying to become enlightened. Please give me a teaching. And he says, no, it's not the right time. So the Buddha was known for not speaking when he was doing his arms round. But he asks him a third time, kind of third time lucky. And the Buddha says, okay then, Bahia, I will give you a teaching. And all he says to him is, in the seen, only the seen. In the heard, only what is heard. In the sensed, only what is sensed. In the cognized, in the thought, only what is cognized or thought. He says, if you can see like that, then you won't be in this, or in that, or in between the two, or beyond. So that's the kind of esoteric bit. And Bahia, that immediately has an effect on him. So he kind of awakens. And then the tragedy of the story is a cow comes along and tramples over him, then he dies. And then the other Buddha's followers say to the Buddha, what should we do with Bahia's body? How should we mark this? And the Buddha says he'd awakened, so he needs to be honoured. And they buried the body and built a stupa, a small monument, and honoured him. So that's the story.
It's a great story, isn't it? No, it is. It's a great story. I'm serious.
I mean, the thing at the end is kind of tragic, but it links to what happens before, where he's got this urgency to find out and to know, and a sense that time is limited. So it's almost like there's a premonition in his dream, an inspiration to go and see, go and find the Buddha.
Why does this inspire you at the moment?
Yeah, I think what I'm inspired by the story is its humanness. To go back to the emotions and really feeling emotions. It's like you've got this person who thinks of themselves quite highly, and then they fall into doubt. And I just relate to that. I've never thought I'm enlightened, but I can relate to that questioning and the subtlety of emotions sometimes, that maybe we think one thing, then we have a doubt, and then we get the kind of fire to go and do something. Then the way he meets the Buddha, he's impressed. Then there's the urgency again to give him a teaching. So I think there's this thread of human emotion through it that's just very ordinary, and that I think we could all relate to. So that inspires me, that Buddhism is about people and real emotion, and that real desire for some kind of meaning, or that desire for some kind of fulfillment and satisfaction, and end of difficulties and not knowing. So I can relate to it on that level. I think the other thing is the teaching that the Buddha gives. I love its simplicity. So the Udana is a collection of really early teachings, and it's kind of chronological. So it goes from the moment of the Buddha's enlightenment into his creation of a Sangha. So it's like the very early stages of the Buddha's life as the Buddha. So he's meeting people for the first time, and he's trying to communicate what he has discovered. But here we are, like 2,500 years later. We've got, you've already mentioned, we've got early Buddhism, we've got Mahayana Buddhism, Vajrayana, Tantric Buddhism. We've got all these teachings, lists of Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, 5 spiritual faculties, So it's all been worked out over 2,500 years. But back then they didn't have any of that. There was no working out, there was just the Buddha meeting someone and somehow having to communicate something and find a way to communicate. So I love the simplicity of in the seen, only the seen. It's like he's just saying, look, if you look properly, you'll see everything. If you listen properly, you'll hear everything. If you see thoughts as thoughts, then the whole of reality will present itself. Of course, it's anyone who's ever tried to meditate knows that that's almost impossible, because we try to look at the breath, and rather than seeing the breath, we might see an idea of the breath, we might stray into thinking about the breath, and then we stray into thinking about all kinds of other things. So it's not easy to do, is it? But if we could do it, that would contain everything. We don't need all this elaborate other teaching, just in the seen, only the seen. So I like the simplicity of it and the depth of that.
It's funny because in a way it's one of those things that drew me to Buddhism, that story. It's like, it's so pared back and so stripped back, but there's something it's mystical at the heart of it that you have a touch of in your own experience sometimes, don't you? Get, as Bante says, a glimpse of a glimpse of a glimpse of what that might be, just the seen and just the heard, and you're your bandwidth has gone from being Berlin kind of grey this to and then it's back again.
Yeah. So it's like developing a sensitivity, isn't it? Which you mentioned, like more of a receptivity. Like when we look at things, can we really look? You know, we see things, don't we? Flashes, but can we really look? Probably we need to stop in order to look. So what I like about it is it's like a call to the senses. Because often in Buddhism you get a kind of critique of the senses. We suffer because we see things and we want them, and we see things and we hate them and we want to destroy them. So it's like the senses are a problem. And I don't think it's like that. I think the way we relate to our sensory experience is the problem. Yeah. So the sensory experience is neutral or even positive. And if we could relate to our sense experience differently, that would make all the difference. And
it does relate to that whole thing of just being here. It's such a kind of cliched, hackneyed old phrase now, isn't it? Be in the now, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of that. You're actually alive while you're alive somehow.
Yeah, yeah. And I think maybe we can take that, well, just being here. Like, what, just here? I don't want to just be here, because our usual relationship to here is it's difficult, it's painful, blah, blah, blah. But I think your image of Vajrapani and the other images, they're images of what here really is. If we could relate to our experience in a different kind of way.
It's also interesting because like a good friend of mine, Janananda, he was also a Vajrapani practitioner, and he was saying there's all this talk. He was a bit pokey, unsurprisingly, being a practitioner. But he was saying all this talk about people saying they just want to be here now, be in the present moment. He said it's rubbish. People don't want to be here because it can be painful, it can be difficult, it can be confusing. So people make sure they're not here mentally. They distract themselves. So you have to be honest about that, a bit like you say, be honest about what's going on.
the real
And so
emotion.
you need some kind of, let me thread it in, you need some energy to be actually in some courage to actually be here.
Yeah.
Because we say we want to be here, and that's the only place we can be in a good way and enjoy our lives. But much of the time, or a lot of the time, we don't want to be here, so we're distracting ourselves, and we're not seeing in the scene and hearing what's heard.
Yeah, because we don't want to,
No.
like you say, because
We think we do. but we
desire
don't.
is taking us away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we'd have to change, we'd have to face something.
Yeah.
Change.
I think there's another danger as well, isn't there, of a teaching like this, of just trying to fix ourselves here. So, okay, I've really got to see. So then we get tense about seeing everything. And, I've really got to hear, so I'm sort of blocking everything else out so I can hear the sounds. Okay, thought.
Yeah.
And we can become a bit...
That's the Buddhist robot I was talking about.
The Buddhist robot, the answering machine.
There you go. The
So
answering
we
machine.
need to stamp on that.
Stamping it, yeah.
So Sangharakshita, he used to call it alienated awareness, which I think is a good phrase. It's like we are aware in it to some extent, and we are seeing things, but we're out of touch with something. We're out of touch with the real emotions.
Yeah.
And that can just become another strategy for avoidance of what's really happening.
I remember Padmasagara, who's the president of the centre, saying once, I think it was him, he was saying he knew this guy that thought he'd kind of attain enlightenment by changing language. So instead of saying like, God, I'm really angry, he said, anger is arising with a bus driver slamming the door in my face. He's like, anger is arising. It's like, no, you're just losing the word I now in a pretend way.
So if you don't refer to yourself, then that means you're
not there.
You don't
you're
feel
enlightened.
it. Yeah.
There's no self because there's no I.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that relevant?
Yeah, no, I think so. But again, I think the image you've brought today, it reminds us of the life in it all, and like you say, the energy, the fire, the passion. That has to be there, doesn't it? Otherwise it's just a dry kind of game that we're playing. I think, it's just another avoidance
boring
strategy. Yeah. Any questions?
From me?
From you or from other people? Maybe we've got a few minutes left. Either about Bahia or about the Vajrapani.
I found it interesting how you're talking about how you relate to doubt, that you are actually giving it a tone of, well, it can be inspiring, you can actually use it to further your practice, which is usually for me like, I go downwards. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, there is a distinction made within the Buddhist tradition between types of doubt. So one type of doubt is called vicikicca, which is like a fetter, so something that binds us. So it's one of the first three fetters, a view that we are fixed and unchangeable, a view that we can perform certain ritual practices and that's all we need, and then doubt. So doubt in that case is a bind or a limitation because we just end up in cycles of doubt. So we never make up our mind. It's like, we sit down to meditate, shall I do the mindfulness of breathing? Yeah, count the breath. No, maybe I should do the metta because I've been a bit angry today. But then, I'm so angry, so I'm going to go back to the mindfulness of breathing. And we don't meditate, we just have 30 minutes of doubt. Yeah? Or we're just doubtful about whether we should do this with our life or this with our life. And I think there's a healthy amount, but then if it goes beyond a certain point, we have to ask, like, are we avoiding making a decision? Are we deliberately throwing up doubt to stay safe where we are and not change? Then there's a more kind of existential doubt, which the tradition acknowledges, which I think that's very helpful, that actually we don't know. So we can talk about Buddhism, our practice, inspire you to try it out and experiment, but we don't really know where it's going. Nobody knows where it's going. So that not knowing, I think, is an inspiration. Because it's like, okay, let me acknowledge that I really don't know. I think I see things, but I need to look again and I don't know. what I could really see.
Mm.
We talked about the precepts. Do any of us know what it would be like to feel continual, unconditional love for everybody and everything? We don't know that. So that kind of doubt, I think, is healthy, because it's like, well, what would that be like? It can be intimidating, but it's a healthy doubt, because then I think a deeper kind of faith and inspiration and confidence can come. If we think we know everything, forget it. If any of us here think, I know what he's talking about already, I don't know what I'm talking about already. So how can you know? There's a great story, another quick story. The Buddha, just after his enlightenment, he meets this teacher called Kashyapa, who's got, say, 200 people following him. And the Buddha starts performing all these miracles. You don't have to take it literally. So he makes like fire just spring up in different places. There's this big festival happening, and the Buddha doesn't go to the festival. He goes off like around 300,000 worlds collecting alms food and comes back. And every time he performs a miracle, this other guy, Kashyapa, says, that's impressive, but he's not enlightened like me. And it happens about 20 times. And in the last time, the Buddha just says, look, Kashyapa, you're not enlightened. And you're not on the way to becoming enlightened. And then he suddenly realizes and kind of becomes one of the Buddha's disciples. So there's a lot in that story that would need unpacking, but the point is we can really fool ourselves into thinking we've got somewhere.
I think partially that's why it is really important to have a community.
Yeah,
because I think because like I went to Copenhagen like years ago, and I was like teaching a bit of meditation, and I was by myself. Yeah, and people start thinking you're amazing. They're just like, oh wow, because everyone's having amazing experiences by themselves during meditating. They think it's you, and then you start thinking, oh, it must be me. I must be amazing. Like everyone's, and I could see how you get into some weird cult vibe, and it's gone completely wrong. So I think it's you need people around you to kind of make sure you remember that you're not special.
Yeah. So a healthy doubt of friends to point out to you.
Super important.
Yeah.